bring up here now a slide that shows you what the topics were in those different rooms. You can see that in room 1, they were talking about what will our industry look like in 6 to 12 months' time. In room 2, they were talking about technology, innovation, and incident response. And in room 3, they were talking there primarily about policy responses to COVID-19. So in a few moments, they will be back, and I will hand over to David Enser to introduce the spokespeople for those different breakout sessions so that we can hear in more detail what they've been saying. So welcome back to all of you. The breakout sessions are coming to an end, and we will then be able to talk to people. So let's go over now to our panel who have reassembled this, the magic of interactive communication, which I suppose we're all starting to get used to, more or less. And if you look on the screen, you can see that David Enser is there at the top, and it's his role now to tell us precisely what it was that was discussed, and also to bring us up to date with what people decided or talked about in those breakout sessions. So over to you then, David.
Thank you very much. What I will do, John, is I will quickly summarize the discussion. We had a great discussion in our breakout room. I took the one on technology, innovation, and major incident response. So what I'll do is I'll take a couple of minutes to run people through what we talked about, and then I'll hand off to Andrea. Andrea Piacentini is based in Glasgow in Scotland. And he will take you through the output from his breakout group. He's a Res Forum partner and a long-term friend. And then also we'll switch over after Andy to Jose Segade for the third summary of the third breakout room. So from my side, as I mentioned, we talked about technology, innovation, and major incident response. And I think we had some fascinating examples. Of course, there are the obvious ones. We talked about many of us are, have families. Excuse me. So seeing education digitalize overnight. If it works for children, it can also, of course, work for employees as well in terms of learning and personal development. I wonder what developments we'll see there. In the subject of, health and innovation, you've seen this huge leap forwards. You've got online triaging. For anyone who knows an organization called GPDQ, a UK-based startup, they're now doing global coronavirus triaging over the phone with registered doctors, and just started up like that, and they're up and running overnight. I find that fascinating. You've got Formula One teams going from concept to design to testing to production of ventilators in the space of 2 to 3 weeks. If you look at what Mercedes have been doing in partnership with the UK Health Service. We heard from Annetta in Hong Kong, working for Arup. The whole team has switched over to Microsoft Teams to engage and to work together as remote teams. Bruno from IBM in Canada talked about, on the one hand, there's a travel ban, which is perhaps as envisaged, but at the same time, there's been and will continue to be a continued investment in IT infrastructure from IBM to make sure that the infrastructure and the bandwidth, if you will, is there in future to support increased remote working. I think we heard a fascinating statistic from Dawn at Micron in Boise, Idaho. 70% of business travel just cut overnight, down to 30%. Everyone else is going to be working remotely from now on. And we were speculating what, of course, that might mean for remote working or virtual assignments. If you're, say, based in location A, but all of your work and the economic benefit is being received by a different company entity, what that might mean for policy, although perhaps that's a question for the policy group. We talked, of course, about leadership around this concept of virtual and remote working and working remotely through technology. I think Ben from Newcastle University stressed the point that it's not remote working as normal, and that's the fundamental point to raise. So as leaders, of course, leaders need to be helping employees and teams to understand tolerance, to have an appreciation for everyone's personal circumstances. I give the personal example. I was on a conference call a couple of weeks ago. My boys were here because it's the Easter holidays. and I was on a call. There was a little background noise from the boys, and the person who I was speaking to started shouting and telling me to take it seriously. I was a little taken aback by that. But I think as leaders can be reinforcing principles of understanding tolerance and that this is not normal times. I think Alejandra from Johnson & Johnson in Switzerland and Zurich talked about, there's been even mass locations or relocations of production sites, which is a huge thing. It's not a project that I would want to, of course, undertake in times like this. And finally, Ben from Newcastle University talked that he sees that in terms of managing GM going forward from this, we're going to see a whole lot more integration, digital integration. It's a point that I personally believe very much in. I strongly agree with this concept of marrying employee experience with complex compliance, particularly, of course, if there's virtual assignments and more remote working. What does that mean from a compliance framework, and how can it best be managed? And then, of course, global employee traveller tracking. I, as a practitioner previously as head of program for a major DAX 30 German company, I can testify that when we had the Fukushima incident or the flooding in Bangkok some years ago, not quite of the same scale as COVID-19, but still they presented us huge challenges with traveller tracking, knowing where people were, and then being able to communicate in a proper fashion with these people in disparate locations worldwide. First of all, identifying who you have, and then secondly, then communicating. But I don't want to hold the microphone too much, so perhaps Andrea, I could pass over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. So our session was pretty good. We talked about what would the industry look like in 6 to 12 months. And in essence, this sort of slightly overlapped with adaptations in policy types. But in essence, what people were beginning to play with was a further evolution of what we call assignment models. So first of all, people talked about virtual assignments and what that could look like. Now, by a virtual assignment, that actually means that you're part of the host team, but you work remotely. And therefore, do you adapt to the host time zone? Now, Paula from Arup said this is something they were thinking about. You're on virtual assignment, therefore, if you're assigned to the US from the UK, your working time zone is a US time zone. And that's quite a mind-blowing thing. And yet, it's something that they're playing with. But the biggest issue actually was something that I talked about with Jerry O'Neill of the Res Forum a few weeks back, which was how do you shape virtual teams? And if people aren't willing to go long term, how do you integrate shorter term assignments, if you like, to the management of virtual teams? I'll tell you what I mean by that. Let's just say I'm a newly appointed manager and my team sits in another location. So it's virtually a me and them. How do I build rapport and management of that team? Now, one of the models talked about was a type of version of short-term commuting, whereby maybe for the first 6 months, the person goes out for a week, a month, integrates with the team, understands the culture of a team, in order that at the end, that can then be managed fully remotely. And this is something that Brigitte of Doka GmbH, Brigitte Login, talked about, something that they're working with, something that's actually in place in that organisation. And I found that a fascinating idea. And I think this will be the start of the journey. And we ended up with some contributions also from Roxana of HSBC, where she actually is a person that was virtually onboarded to a new team in the last few weeks. And it all happened offline. She had some concerns going into it, and she's actually found the whole thing worked really well and efficiently. Why is that? Well, probably a lot to do with the culture of HSBC. There appeared to be already an existing culture of virtual working. One of the things we as a group in our session talked about was using technology as an equalizer. So where virtual working can be challenging is when you're the one guy dialing into a meeting of a room of people, and all it takes is 2 people to talk, and it's just white noise. The equalizer is something like this, where we're all dialed in, even though the whole team might be sitting in a location. We make a point of all dialing in from our desk on a Skype call or whatever technology, and suddenly we're all engaging in the same way using the same technology enablement. And so you'll begin to see things like that. Now, my provocative question to the group was, what does this mean for GM professionals? Will your skills still be the same, i.e. operationalising moves from A to B? What will your skills move to? Will you move from tactical operation to actually an enabler of virtual working? and where will your skills now be required? Where will they sit? What will you need to contribute to the discussion of HR? And nobody really had the answers, but we did see an evolution of global mobility skills, whereby.
Andy, sorry to interrupt you there. I think there's so much to talk about that we could go on and on, but we're unfortunately getting close to the end of our live stream. So if you don't mind, I'll just quickly ask Jose to come in. And again, we can make this the topic of other of our VIMs, and we can go into these in more detail. But Jose, just for the sake of this one, let's quickly hear from you what you spoke about in your breakout session.
Yeah, I think the key thing was, obviously there's been an exercise to engage with HR and the business around the active assignee population. So to understand, what is the business need, but what's the individual need as well, and extending to individuals that are saying that pre-move phase as well. What we discussed, I think often there's quite a difficult balancing act between ensuring business continuity and actually what's feasible at the moment. As we know, borders are closed, visa processing centres are often closed as well. So, mobility is in quite a tricky position. So, we discussed some of the challenges around navigating that. And then probably from a policy perspective, as Andy said, the virtual assignment has really come into play, and that can be quite straightforward situations where individuals are just in their home location, maybe have started their assignment, which is generally a bit more straightforward, but it could be people who've moved themselves to an alternative third location. And that brings with it a number of challenges. So again, it was around how do you balance the individual need versus, from a business perspective, is reasonable and possible and compliant.
Excellent, thank you, Jose. We've actually already